Welcome back, everybody. Okay. Mr. Trotman, are you on here?
I am.
Wonderful. Before you say hello, I just wanted to welcome you all formally, just on behalf of the Ridgewood Library and our wonderful Board of Trustees and the Friends of the Ridgewood Library. I'm just so thankful to have an opportunity to share this film with you tonight. And we have a lot of people on our, just gonna put this on gallery view for a sec, on our call today who are doing really amazing work. So I just wanted to also thank NAACP, who helped to organize this event tonight, who is a colleague and a good friend of Mr. Trotman's. My sister, Andrea Panjwani, human rights attorney, she first told me about Bryan Stevenson, who's been her great mentor, personal professional mentor for years and years. So, and she had the privilege of meeting him a couple of years ago. So it's just so nice to learn more about him through this film. So I'm just going to have Willie Trotman reflect on the film a little bit and tell us about his work. He is the president of the Spring Valley NAACP and has done affirmative action work for the state of New York. And he'll have some interesting stories for you later, but he grew up in Florida for 16 years in a segregated school system. So Mr. Trotman, welcome. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that and then just reflect on some of the work that you've done and as it connects with Bryan Stevenson. And then we really want to get to hear a lot of your thoughts. So we'll start with you.
All right. So to Andrea and Roberta, thank you for having me. I actually grew up in a small town called Quincy, Florida, about 21 miles west of the capital, Tallahassee. Our schools, we had two schools. We had an elementary and a high school. The elementary went from 1st to 6th grade, and the high school went from 6th grade to 12th grade. I never went to school with a white person during those 12 years of school. There was never anybody white who walked on our campus, and we never walked on the white students' campus. But I still feel that I got an incredibly good education. Unfortunately, the school books that we had the names of other students in them, but they were not students from our school. They were students from the white school. So our school was named Carter Paramore. In the front of the book where you identified, wrote your name, it had Quincy High School, which was the name of the white student school. Came to New York, got drafted in the military, spent a year in Vietnam, went to work at Rockland Psych Center, and retired as affirmative action administrator. Became involved in the NAACP in the latter part of the 90s, became president in 2004, and have since been doing that kind of work. Some of the interesting pieces that Bryan brought up that I thought was interesting was, why do you do this work? Why do you do this kind of work? And probably every so often people ask me, why don't you go on back to Florida, enjoy your retirement? Or why do you continue to do this? And I don't have an answer for that. I heard Bryan try to answer that question. He said, well, because I'm broken too. But I don't have an answer. I think that I understand that someone did it for me. I couldn't have the opportunities that I've had without somebody making some sacrifices so that we could get where we were. As a young high school student graduating, I think probably that June, I believe, was Goodman and Schwerner, Cheney came through and met with us, and it was probably my first real initiation into civil rights to help us to register people to vote. And pretty much since then, I've probably been within advocacy. I've been doing advocacy. So the movie, it's an incredible story that Bryan Stevenson puts together in terms of how many people who live in this so-called land, country of opportunity, have been wrongfully convicted, have been wrongfully put to death simply because of the color of their skin. Um, and how it continues to this day to happen. People will say, yeah, it's the land of opportunity, but the land of opportunity for whom? Were my great grandparents kings and queens in Africa? Um, and so what I get now, the handouts I get now, the slice of bread that I get from that whole loaf, people will tell me, well, you should be happy with that slice. But once upon a time, I owned the whole entire loaf, and somebody took it from me, and now I want to give me a slice and say I should be happy. When we fight for the kids here in East Ramapo, 96% of whom are children of color, it's understanding that once upon a time their forefathers owned loaves of bread, and now they get a slice and they get handouts. And that if we don't fight for them, like Bryan Stevenson fights for those individuals, that they won't have a shot at life. They won't have an opportunity. It's trying to change that ban the box law that says if you commit a felony at some point, well, you're never going to qualify to get a decent job anymore in life. It's trying to change those things and to understand that even if you're innocent when you're poor, you don't get that quality kind of service, and you can end up in jail. So with that, that's just some kind of insight. I thought it was incredible, compelling story that he tells of individuals once they've spent 30 years in jail and nobody came to apologize, and your life is pretty much gone because that's the life you've had, and I think that I continue to fight for young people now simply because we don't want that to happen to them. It's like either the jail or the gangs are waiting for you if you don't get an education. And so the door opens with an education. There's no guarantee, but we want to make sure that they have an opportunity for an education. That's so very, very paramount. I want to take some comments now. And
I like I'm glad you mentioned about the point of the apology and humility, and just how he mentioned his grandmother so often. And he just said, right, the ability to apologize, to acknowledge, to have that sense of humility is what makes you strong. And it seemed like she imparted so much to him as a young man, and the importance of reflecting and listening to the history in the walls and in nature, like just listening and understanding that, and just a physical hug and embrace that he was meant to feel long after she was gone. I thought that was powerful.
Yeah, and I think that for guys like Bryan Stevenson, and he says, you know what? Sometimes I look to see what I have, and I probably could be rich and have all of those things, but there's something just a little bit more important in life, and that I think that's what's most compelling for me as well.
Right. So we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to put comments in the chat or turn your mics on and raise your hand. We'd love to hear what you think.
Hi, I'm NAACP.
Yes, and welcome. We said hello. Thank you earlier today. Thank you so much for helping put this together tonight. It's wonderful to see you.
Oh, thank you, and Mr. Trotman and everyone. I have a question to Mr. Trotman and for everyone really, but this film is really quite compelling, and I remember that part where he says that he always goes back to the law, right? That it has been, the law starting from the Supreme Court has allowed for the brutality and the slavery and the suffering to happen. And he mentions at one point that, that something to the effect that the apology should come from the Supreme Court. And I don't know, Mr. Trotman, what do you think about that? And do you think we'll ever see that? And how should we, I mean, I'm not an attorney, but I do belong to the NAACP, and how should it should come from the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
The apology should come from there.
Right.
Yeah, the apology, and I understand him wanting an apology. It's simple. America is not an apologetic country. I mean, to take it for what it's worth, America is a pretty horrible country. I mean, if you look at it realistically, and people may say that I'm saying this in a negative way, but if you look at what has happened to the Native Americans, and if you look at what has happened to African Americans, and you look at what happened to those children who came from Mexico, and what we did to them, we're not a nice country. And we're not an apologetic country. Yeah, they should. They destroyed his life. He deserves more than an apology. 30 years. This guy spent 16 years on death row. I mean, there's no way you're gonna become normal. But I think that it requires each of us each morning to look in the mirror and say, you know what, I want to help America today become America. But I will fight, and there are those individuals who fight right next to me, but it requires each of us to once upon a time we were looked as 3/5 of a human being. Why would another human being look at another human being for no particular reason and think that way? The person next to you bleeds red blood just like you do. I mean, why can't we just look at each other and treat each other as human beings? And so that becomes that apology when that individual treats the next individual as a human being.
That's great. Lisa, you had a comment?
Yes, I did. I am also a member of the Spring Valley NAACP with Mr. Trotman and NAACP, and I want to thank you for this opportunity and for the film, which was very much eye-opening. And one of the quotes I'm going to paraphrase was, he said, if we are going to make progress, we have to be honest. And I think that's what Mr. Trotman is alluding to, the fact that in this country, we have yet to apologize for slavery, for mass incarceration, for Jim Crow, for any number of things. And so with that in mind, he also mentioned one of the things he's Mr. Bryan Stevenson said was that the narrative of racial difference and white supremacy still exist. And so how do we deal with that? Because if we don't address those two issues, racial difference and white supremacy, and we've seen it just yesterday with the police officer in Atlanta, Georgia, who said that this young white man who murdered not 8 people, 6 who have of Asian descent, and said that that it wasn't racially motivated. What do you mean it's not racially motivated? So until we deal with these things honestly, I think, and until we deal with the racial difference and the white supremacy difference, we are going to continue to spin our wheels. And so we need to discuss this, and we need to find out ways and means in which we can do that.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Good.
So I want to say to that, Ms. Watkins, well, not to Ms. Watkins, no. So I'm going to take that back. In thinking about this panel, because this film is very intense, and I could see Bryan I know this work takes a toll on him. For instance, I see my fellow men, Mr. Trotman, Dr. Cohen, people, everyone here, it takes a toll. And I was thinking about it, you know, but what keeps him going, right? What keeps Mr. Trotman going, Dr. Cohen, people here? And I thought about something. The fact that we're having this conversation is already a start. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, you know, just to take a moment and look at the number of people who are on this call. And that is a beginning. I think the other piece that I think Ms. Watkins was touching on is, and I think it clicked for me because when I was watching the film, I was like, if I had been, I couldn't do what Bryan is doing. But then he mentioned something about, and I think it's key, and I think it's also something that Mr. Trotman is talking about, and I would love to hear what others have to say. That story about when his grandmother took him to the shack, and then he's like, she's like, do you hear that sound? And he said, you know, it's like, anyway, but then afterward, and it just clicked for me. He has figured out, and I think I understand, is he's figured out a way of not being afraid of looking at the suffering or sitting with the suffering, right? Like when he called that man and said, I'm sorry, I can't do anything for you. You know, if you take that suffering and you know, that will destroy you, like really, unless you, and I think he says, unless you realize that that suffering and looking at it constantly is what's making you not want to give up, right? That's precisely why not. And I think that that's something that to me is very hopeful. Is and I think that's what I'm taking about talking about it is for instance, he also alludes to what happened in Germany, right? Or in Rwanda, and I think South Africa, which is something that I think we're beginning to do here in this country. No, we are not anywhere near that. But for instance, I think there are conversations around how the police, our policing system, right? And I mean, there have been movements about defund the police, and there's controversy of it. But I think this idea that if we gather together around constantly look, this is really horrible and it hurts, and we have to, we don't want that as human beings for each other, right? And I remember, for instance, something that we do not, I think, have in this country is we haven't gotten to the point, or the question is, why haven't we come to the point where racial violence is considered like what the Holocaust was, because that's what it is. And I think, you know, there's, you know, but that's what came to my mind last night, like, this is our Holocaust. And, you know, not to be afraid to this, and until we put it in, you know, in that, you know, if you say something like, if you paint a swastika or call someone, you know, something anti-Semitic, you can be sued precisely for that anti-Semitic slur, right? That needs to happen.
Yes, yes.
For the African-American communities.
Yes.
I'm not excluding anyone, but it needs to happen. And
yes, yes.
And I think the question is, why not, right? And that is really glaring. It's because we don't want to.
We're not truthful about it. We don't want to talk. We don't
want to.
No, we don't.
And America,
here on this panel might want to, but I mean, the people outside this panel, what are they doing? And how can we engage them? Because those are the ones that we need to engage with.
right? Because America is still living the lie, still living the lie. And I'm 87 years of age. And so I know I've worked with the poor, with people of color all my life. And I know the pain, the suffering, the horror. I used to call the projects in Patterson concentration camps. But we live in a segregated society. We're here in Ridgewood, New Jersey, and it is a segregated society for the most part. And it has been. I've lived here for 40 years, and prior to that, 20 years in the neighboring town. So there have been some people who sought to integrate, who sought to not live the lie, But too many people were comfortable, so comfortable in their white skin and in their privileged life, that even if you say to them, we live a privileged life, and we have, because we haven't suffered, we simply haven't been through what racial inequality and injustice have done to people over the course of the last 400 years. And Bryan Stevenson is so true. This film is brilliant. It should be shown in every school, in every church, in every home, to people finally to say, we have to look at ourselves and we have to see the truth of our history. And we have to realize that we have lived the lie. And even now, and here, just going forward, here in this past election, I thank God there were enough of us, 80 million, who voted for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and brought into the administration fantastic people. We have wonderful, wonderful people in every department now, from the Attorney General on down, Department of State, Energy, the whole of it. And so this is the great hope, but it means something that we have to do in this country is have the education of each and every person about the truth of our history, and own it, and to say, oh my God, what did we do? What have I done? What can we do? How can we integrate? And how can we prevent our children? And so the last thing I'll say is this: here we won this election, and we brought into the election, of course, the great state of Georgia, because of the work of Stacey Abrams for the past 10 years. And of course, we have Senator Warnock, and of course, Josh Ossoff. But right away, the segregationists have, in 43 states, have now put into place in their states opposition to people of color voting. That's what we're dealing with right now, and of course, that's why we have to pass what we have to pass in the Senate, H.R. 1, because all of the voting rights, so much of the voting rights were taken away just several years ago. So all of this work goes on, but without an educated society, I'm talking about white people throughout this country who haven't educated themselves or want to face up to the reality of what has happened here. We have so much work ahead of us. However, there are more and more people who say, I'm standing up for the truth. I want to live a life of justice. And I can tell you this, in my 87th year, one of the greatest things next to my family is to say, I have been on the right side of justice all my life. Yes. But I had the advantage of seeing and listening to Martin Luther King Jr., you see. And so I couldn't do anything less. But here I'm at this forum tonight with 47 people, or however many, and all I know is that I know that I'm just so in love with everyone who's here, who's willing to face the truth and to say, just keep on moving forward, because there are more good people, but the people have to be educated. And just what Roberta is doing here by showing this film, the more, because I'm going to go back to my church, and say, this has got to be shown, this has got to be shown, because we have to keep educating people about the truth.
Right. Thank you, Jane. Thank you very much. I want to go through just a few of the comments in the chat. From Andrea, interested in your thoughts on how we can acknowledge the past in order to move toward reconciliation here in the Northeast. The memorial for peace and justice is so powerful. And I wonder if there's any sort of, in addition to other ways of reconciling, I wonder if there's any ideas on how we can get people more engaged here. You know, that the history of this, you know, racism is, it's national, international. It's not just in the South. Is there anything here in the Northeast specifically that we can do, like to acknowledge the past? Yeah, let me just go through a few more, because some of these comments and questions are related. From Lynn, as mentioned in the discussion, how do we move forward with reconciliation with our country unable to face the truth? That's the first step. The reference in the film of we haven't collectively learned how to apologize was impactful. Absolutely. From Terry, I feel that the word humble that Bryan stated is very key. I believe that part of the reason for white supremacy is that white people are not always humble, but instead act entitled. If we can begin from a place of being humble, then perhaps white people would be more open to discussing the legacy that we have been part of and doing something to address it under the leadership of Black and Indigenous communities. Lisa, oh, Lisa, you're getting some props from, Jane, you're getting props from Lisa. The movie must be shown in every school, every church, synagogue, mosque, and other houses of worship. We must educate. Absolutely. That's another thing I wanted to bring up. A lot of you have been part of like bystander intervention events, and I just signed up for one today for the Stop Anti-Asian American and Xenophobic Harassment. There's about 5 or 6 of these 1-hour trainings this month in April. And I think that's such a powerful thing we can do too, because, you know, we are actively coming to an event like this and having this conversation, but there are so many things that we do by not saying enough, you know, by not having the power to get out there or go to rallies or to take on a position like Bryan and many on the call here today. So what do you feel about just being active, like using whatever form and platform you have? Can you think of, you know, in your own life, like ways that we can be really a lot more active without doing something that might not be comfortable for you? It still has to be within however you express yourself. But anyway, if anybody wants to address any of those points.
Patricia had her hand held up. Patricia.
Oh, Patricia, let me unmute you. Okay.
No, there we go.
Oh, there she goes. Okay.
Yeah, a couple of things. I've met Bryan Stevenson a couple of times. I'm a journalist, and I met him when he was working on youth justice and getting the campaign for the fair sentencing of youth in Washington. And I went to Montgomery twice. I've been to the Memorial for Peace and Justice. And I think one of the things, I don't know if we're able to do it, but there are school trips when there's not a pandemic. And maybe instead of going to Disney World, Montgomery offers an incredible amount of perspectives and history. I mean, it's where Rosa Parks started the bus boycott. It's where the 50-mile march from Selma to Montgomery for voting rights. You know, the Capitol is there. It's this wonderful memorial and museum. But as students or parents and grandparents with children have to, you know, prepare people to see something like this. Like, you don't go to Auschwitz without preparation, and Montgomery would require this too. I think in America, we often talk about the bottom line, and the bottom line is that Bryan Stevenson has contributed enormously to the wealth of Alabama, and especially the city of Montgomery. It was like a sleepy backwater capital, and it now is full of gigantic hotels and restaurants and places, because 400,000 a year, 400,000 people coming to see a memorial is, you know, it's a great, great amount of people. So I recently gave some lectures on white privilege, and there was a lot of discussion after it. And among the things that people seemed to want to do was look into the curricula of high schools and middle schools. And that's something we can easily, well, I don't know if easily, but, you know, contacting local school boards and see what's being taught and what other textbooks are out there. And it's a way of looking. Also, we in Bergen County live 15 to 20 miles from Wall Street and Water Street, which at times was the second largest slave market in the United States, or in the beginning states. Only Savannah and New Orleans were bigger at times. And so it's very close to us. We can say we're many generations away. We had nothing to do with slavery, but you know, it happened right here in our area. It was a transport center and a selling center for human bodies that, you know, either walked or took the boat down into the South. So there's really a lot of ways we can be creative about this, and seeing this film tonight and having the conversation, I think, is helpful to many people.
Mm-hmm. We were part of a community reads last year, and we used the book So You Want to Talk About Race. And we had, I know some people on this call were part of that too, and it was really powerful. I mean, it was mainly, you know, people from like surrounding counties, Bergen County and Fair Lawn and Glen Rock. And it was great to just, you know, we had this large group and then we go into small breakout rooms. And it was just, you know, like by reading this book and talking with people, like it just kind of shined a light on things that we didn't really know were, you know, within our own mindset. So I think that's good to just be proactive about what you're reading and how you're, you know, talking with people. We have another comment here. Okay, this is from, let's see, I think, okay, from Nicole. To pass to reconciliation is paved with acknowledgement that racism is baked into the fabric of our society. Apologizing, that's our theme tonight, right? Acknowledging, apologizing has to be painted with broad strokes. It's not enough to detail the wrongs in this, wrongs and be contrite. All of the systems of oppression that flow from that history must also be righted. Absolutely. Let's see, I'm encouraged by people on this forum and by the work of organizations like the NAACP and EJI to push us toward progress. Thank you, Nicole. I agree with that. Absolutely. I think. Oh, go ahead.
No, sorry, Roberta, sorry. No, I think that was great, but I think she said something that I really want us to read it.
Oh.
Says that, Nicole says that she's not sure the country's ready.
Oh, right. Yes, I think.
Reckoning.
So that is the common theme. Like people are not ready. It's too hard. It's like what do we, I mean, how do we make people acknowledge this and own it and apologize? I think humility, acknowledgement is the common theme here. I think the memorial, I think, is so powerful because it is such a tangible, like, you know, to go and have those young students pick up the soil and acknowledge and personify, like just have names on those jars. Like that's such a powerful, powerful truth. And it really does force you to acknowledge the human beings that were, you know, killed over so many years. So how are people ready? Are we ever going to be at that point?
Yes, we have to. We have to. We have to do it because it's either a course of that we're going to remain in a democracy or nationalism and fascism. That's what the last election was all about, and right. That's exactly what we're talking about now in Washington D.C. in the Congress. Right. Are you for? You know, are you for democracy, and are you going to work to preserve it, or do you want to be in an authoritarian dictatorship? Right. That was the last election, and that's what this is all about. And that's why 43 states have immediately come into play to put into place, because quote unquote, too many people of color voted and the Republicans lost. Mm-hmm. That's what we're debating right now. And so that's why we have to come out with a federal law mm-hmm. that puts into place that no, the federal law, the Supreme Court, the federal law is more than the state's law, because in 43 states where there are Republicans controlling the state legislatures, they're putting into place all of these voter restriction laws, mm-hmm. and that's to deny people of color the vote. It's going back to Jim Crow.
Right, absolutely.
And so every person, basically every person in this United States who believes in democracy has to become an educated citizen. We have to know what's going on with our representative and with both our senators and our House of Representatives. And we have to hold their feet to the fire. Mm-hmm. And also we have to be much more active, as you just said before, Roberta. We have to become activists. You observe a situation, you judge it in light of moral teaching, and then you must act, right. You see. And that's what I was raised on all my life. That's why the life that I've had, and the life of my children, my adult children, and my granddaughter. Right. Just the books of John Lewis. My little granddaughter, after reading the trilogy out of the library, the books of John Lewis, I have to make a difference, she said. I had 11 years old. She's already involved in knowing how to be involved in democracy. Mm-hmm. And see, that's what's the big thing here is. In order to live in a democracy, you must be a participant. You just can't say, well, somebody else is going to do it.
Right. Candice, you had a comment?
Yeah, so I think everybody's raised some really great points, and education is so important, but to me, even more important is having the courage to speak up when it matters, and realizing that to achieve equity, that's going to require people who have privilege, and we've brought that up here today on this conversation. That's going to require people who have privilege to leverage their privilege and use that to help achieve equity. And I think when we think of racism and whether we're ready for racism, a lot of times we think about it on a macro scale and all of the big things that we have to do, but there are so many little things and little ways that people can contribute that make such a big difference. So I know for me, I'm an attorney that represents children in family court, children who are accused of crimes. And so I relate a lot with this film. And so one of the big issues right now for us is children's right to have counsel during interrogations. Children in New York are still interrogated without counsel, and with no regard for their brain development and their young age. And I mean, these are things that we can be talking to our legislators and our senators about, and anybody here on this call can do that.
Right.
So we have to think about, you know, small things that we can do, and anybody can do that. And the more people that do that, it makes a difference. So, you know, we just have to take it one step at a time and look in the mirror and see what it is that you can do for your community. But I think that working together, we can make a really big difference.
Absolutely.
I think Don had a comment.
Yeah, Don?
Yeah, about a year and a half ago, a forum that we had with representatives from Ridgewood and other places on peace and justice tried to decide what we should do next. And what came out of that was there's an awful lot going on in race. And we know that it's the foundation of the inequality system in the United States. So let's have someone who can really speak about that, lead us through an intensive year-long program of lectures and leading to action and networking. So that resulted in our Race Together learnings about race and racism in America seminars. That came out of our congregation, and it came out of the, you know, a lot of the activists that people are watching today and joining. And I think the experience is that it takes a long time, and we have to do it till people start resisting us. And we're experiencing that. But that's when I guess we begin to learn that this is a real battle. So I don't know what we're going to do in the second year. Well, this will be finished in December, once a month.
Okay.
But our congregation has decided that we need to put on our main announcement about what Emmanuel stands for. That's our church. Is Black Lives Matter. So we said that it has to be a permanent fixture on our sign.
I see it. I love it. I live right across the street from Emmanuel Baptist. Yes.
That's great. Yeah.
That's great.
So gradually we're getting it into people's consciousness that this is something we've got to work on for a long time.
Right.
But it's so encouraging that the library has done this. And I could name 5 or 6 groups. Of course, the one that was mentioned about Cran and that brought together Glen Rock and for that read was fantastic.
Yeah, it was.
You could see people's minds changing right before your eyes.
Right.
So we're doing the lectures, and then we have each month for there's 8 different groups that meet, mixture of all kinds of people to deal with these issues and listen to the voices in our community, the voices that they make a sacrifice to try to educate us.
Right.
Yes.
Because we're so thick-headed.
Yes.
It takes such a long time. So I think it's so hard to ask them to educate the white people when we should have known.
Right.
But we don't.
Right.
Yes.
I think Andrew makes a good point. Says Bryan Stevenson talks a lot about getting proximate. she's interested in jnana-yoga's and Mr. Trotman's thoughts on how people of different races can come together and get to know each other. You know, relationship really does change things in your mindset, and that can lead to progress. Do you both have any, or anybody have any ideas on how we can get proximate with people we might normally not see in our daily lives?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of reaching out to individuals and then having a discussion about you, started with you and started with the person that you're talking with. And then I think understand the other individual and learn to appreciate the other individual. This forum is fantastic, a fantastic place to start, to have that discussion, to talk about understanding the difference between law and justice. Slavery was a law at one time, but it's so unjust, you know, so it's understanding about whether or not, as you alluded to earlier, whether or not we want to make this a democracy or not. Right now, 2 men on pretty much 50% of the wealth of the United States. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's about understanding that there are people who are very, very poor. It's understanding that there are people who just because of the color of their skin. I mean, and it's gone from black now. It's gone because somebody spewed that the virus came from a different country. Now we hate people based on that. You know, it's having those discussions, sitting down with like-minded people, or at least trying to change the minds and the thoughts of individuals. But it has to start with coming to the table and having a discussion on it, and knowing who we are, honestly. That's my thought anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think there's another word that we need to introduce, and that's organizing. We have to organize and do things that transform us because we're actually doing what we talk about. I think that's the way the transformation really happens. And then you're talking about what you do together to make a difference.
Right.
And I think we're long beyond the talking stage, but we have to keep talking, because a lot of times the things that we do are not what is needed. And we have to focus on the real needs and where we can make a difference. And I think there's, like I said, there's several groups that are doing the education thing, the gun control thing. So we're networking with them and encouraging each other.
Right.
Yes.
So it becomes a movement. That's what Bryan was talking about.
Right.
It has to become a movement.
Right.
Yes, that's it.
I'm just looking at Samuel's comment in the chat. When am I going to be treated as a human being versus a second-class citizen or less than an animal? I mean, you just read something like that, you know, just to think that somebody is feeling that way in this day and age. It's like, we believe you, we hear that, and let's just do something about that. It's just devastating.
But it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Oh, yes.
And Candice, to think of those young clients, I mean, that's unbelievable. Yeah. So I'm going to resend the links to the memorial and the museum. And even though we can't go there right now for for tours, like you can virtually tour, and they're outstanding websites, and you can really get a lot of the experience and share those links with people and have them at least virtually visit these places and have it really resonate with them. Patricia?
I was just going to say, Bryan wrote his memoir. It's called Just Mercy, and there's a on
Yes.
that too.
Yes.
And that's well worth seeing. It basically just deals with the first death penalty case.
Walter, yeah.
Given, yeah. But the book is wonderful. read.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, this film is wonderful. And it's funny, when I was working with the producers, they gave me their mission statement, and it really is the mission of the film and the producers and of forums like this and all of you. So they're saying we strive to use the power of the medium, in this case film, to educate, to bear witness, to promote engagement, to seek more justice, and to generate a bit more empathy among one another. So I'm just grateful to have, you know, forums like films and his memoir and things like that can really generate this kind of discussion and then hopefully action that follows there. So I'll send you a little follow-up email tomorrow with the links. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for spending the time here tonight. And thank you, Mr. Trotman and NAACP and everybody who contributed such thoughtful remarks and experiences. I think a lot of people are engaged in a lot of great endeavors. Just keep going, don't get discouraged, and sign up, don't be a bystander, right? Action. Okay.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you all very much. And we will see you, the next Real Voices is on the Food Co-op in Brooklyn on April 7th. It's a whole different direction, but good stuff. Okay.
So much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.